Whether they opted to get their dialogue in their brains in the most psychotic way imaginable, or even jumped all the way back to high school for research. These actors all went to some pretty crazy lengths for their art. So with that in mind, I'm Gareth, joined by Ellie and Sai, and this is 48 utterly insane things actors did for movie roles. Pedro Pascal learns his lines in an absolutely psychotic way. In all his movies, presumably. Every performer out there will definitely have their own special and unique method when it comes to getting dialogue into their heads. Some are lucky enough to possess the frankly supernatural ability of being able to swiftly absorb the words on the page in no time at all. The lucky souls. Then you have the Mandalorian, The Last of Us, and now fantastic 4-star Pedro Pascal, as the beloved actor revealed during a SAG-AFTRA virtual roundtable recently, with a few other SAG Awards nominees. A bad experience where he ended up forgetting his lines mid-performance resulted in him adopting a new line learning approach. And that's what led to the star pulling out what initially seemed like little more than a bunch of random letters organized in columns on a piece of paper. Okay. After openly calling it a psychotic example of what he has to do to now learn his lines for a role, Pascal explained how he uses the first word in each tower before stating, and then it's this very, very tedious way of making yourself learn the line. It may seem like an utterly crazy process at a glance, but Pascal claims it allows him to learn text really quickly. So if it works for Din Djarin, then you keep doing you, Pedro.
Robert Downey Jr. was trained to play tennis and the violin left-handed. Chaplin. Robert Downey Jr. earned a Best Actor Oscar nomination for his sublime turn as Charlie Chaplin in Richard Attenborough's 1992 biopic Chaplin, and went to considerable lengths to capture the essence of the Hollywood icon. He worked with a coach to imitate Chaplin's posture and the way in which he carried himself, and was also taught to play the violin and tennis left-handed like Chaplin, despite being naturally right-handed. Given that the actor is only seen playing left-handed tennis for a few seconds of the final film, however, it was quite the amount of arguably unnecessary effort. Nevertheless, those few left-handed tennis serves do at least seem completely believable. Downey ended up with an Oscar nomination all the same, so who's to knock him? Rooney Mara learned skateboarding to imitate a teenage boy, the girl with the dragon tattoo. Many eyebrows were raised when Rooney Mara was cast to play goth hacker Lisbeth Salander, given that Mara was best known to audiences for playing Mark Zuckerberg's demure ex, Erica Albright, in The Social Network. Many doubted her ability to play a part previously performed so brilliantly in the Swedish original. But of course, Mara gave herself over to an intense physical transformation, rendering her near unrecognizable. And per Fincher's exacting reputation, he insisted she do something incredibly specific for the part: learn skateboarding. Fincher wanted to make sure Mara shed as much of her traditional femininity as possible, and so by learning to skate, she would end up adopting the physical mannerisms of a teenage boy. And her hard work paid off. She received a Best Actress Oscar nomination for her dedication. So the lesson here? Never doubt Fincher's wisdom. Tom Cruise went undercover as a UPS delivery man to test his ability to blend in. Collateral. Tom Cruise may not have received any Oscar love for his performance as calculating assassin Vincent in Collateral, but it's nevertheless an impressively transformative against-type turn. Director Michael Mann is well known for the homework he gives actors before stepping onto set, and in addition to putting Cruise through an intense weapons training program, he also insisted he work on his undercover tradecraft. Before filming the iconic nightclub shootout scene, Mann wanted to test whether or not Cruise could truly blend into a crowd without being recognized, and so the filmmaker ordered him to go undercover as a UPS delivery man. Well, he did say FedEx, but the uniform clearly says UPS. And see if he could deliver a package without his true identity being ascertained. And Cruise did just that, donning the UPS uniform, complete to the hat and sunglasses, to deliver a package, and even sitting down to make conversation with a nearby randomer. All main cast members learned card throwing from a master magician, Now You See Me. Though Now You See Me's magic tricks rely on a good deal of visual effects wizardry, the main magician cast members did actually receive training to convincingly handle and throw cards. Veteran magician David Kwong was hired as the movie's head magic consultant, spending much of his time, among other things, teaching card throwing to the cast. Dave Franco, who actually turned out to be one of the strongest students, said that they spent the first day of rehearsal not dissecting the script, but in a room throwing cards around. It's especially surprising that the cast were given extensive card training, considering how most viewers would surely assume that the throwing was mostly achieved through either digital assistants or stand-ins. Jon Favreau learned to cook Cuban barbecue with a real food truck owner, Chef. Maybe aside from Ratatouille, Jon Favreau's Chef is one of the best movies ever made about food. And that's in large part because there's authenticity baked into every single frame. Favreau plays a down-and-out chef who rejuvenates his love for cooking by opening a Cuban barbecue food truck, and in order to prepare for the role, he made contact with renowned chef Roy Choi, who himself created a gourmet Korean-Mexican taco truck. Choi was originally brought on as a mere consultant, but ultimately given a co-producer credit due to his extensive contributions to the film. Favreau ended up training at a culinary school and then working in one of Choi's kitchens to learn the craft of food truck barbecue, ensuring he knew the precise particulars of creating an authentic and more importantly delicious Cuban sandwich. The results clearly paid off given the mouth-watering end results on screen, and let's face it, this had to be way more fun and more delicious than any other training on this list. Fran Kranz went to pot school, The Cabin in the Woods. The most iconic and memorable character from The Cabin in the Woods is undeniably Marty, the hilarious stoner whose role in the film ends up subverting many of the horror pothead cliches. But actor Fran Kranz didn't just stumble onto set and pretend to be a toker. He, in his own words, went to pot school. For starters, he received training sessions from experts to roll joints and light bongs, and during the pre-production period divided his time between rehearsing his lines and practicing the physical act of getting high. Kranz said he would go to the production offices and smoke different kinds of marijuana and roll joints and figure out the thermos bong contraption, doing so every morning for about 2 weeks. So yeah, the guy literally got paid to get high all in the name of research. Adam Driver took a bus driving course, Patterson. Unlike most of the actors on this list, Adam Driver was trained in a rather mundane yet undeniably skillful activity for his lead role in the 2016 drama Patterson. The aptly named actor plays a New Jersey bus driver who moonlights as a poet, and in order to convincingly slink into such an everyday role, he spent 2 months training to be a bus driver for real, even earning a legit commercial bus operator's license. Driver has spoken extensively about the challenges of learning to drive a bus and his over-the-odds commitment to doing so despite little of the film actually showing off his vehicular talents. He said, quote, "I didn't have to do it, but I just thought that it would open us up to getting some other shots and angles, and I only got to drive the bus for a couple of shots, but for me it was worth it." Driver claimed that it was more about understanding the character and his routine than anything else, and it seemed to him that driving the bus made the most sense in bringing him closer to the character. The cast were put through a 19th century boot camp, The Village. M. Night Shyamalan's The Village purports to take place in a 19th century Pennsylvania, and in order to help create an air of authenticity, Shyamalan put the film's entire ensemble cast through their paces. Before shooting started, the filmmaker had the cast take part in a 19th century boot camp, where for 3 weeks they reportedly gave up hot running water, mobile phones, and computers, while also learning how to plough fields and even camp out in the woods. Joaquin Phoenix spoke highly of the experience, saying that it helped everyone focus more on the film and get to know each other. Being thrown in at the deep end, ploughing fields and starting up fires to cook forced everyone to really embody their characters. It's definitely an intense way to go about things that wouldn't work for every filmmaker, but for this one, it definitely paid off.
Keanu Reeves worked on bookbinding skills, John Wick. Being an actor is not just playing pretend and reading script. Depending on the projects you work on, you'll almost certainly be asked to do things you've never done before. That isn't just limited to learning different martial arts and doing death-defying stunts, sometimes you get to learn a new hobby. In an interview with Uproxx, Keanu Reeves was asked what he thought the character of professional assassin John Wick did in his free time, to which the star immediately had the answer: he binds books. He was so sure of this, in fact, because scenes of such had been shot for the first Wick film, but had been omitted from the final runtime. What the modest Reeves neglects to mention, but can be seen in behind-the-scenes material, is that he actively learned how to bind books so that he could do it on screen. This is hardly a simple process, so it's both an impressive and unfortunate level of commitment, considering it was ultimately cut from the picture. It's fair to say most of us wouldn't know legitimate bookbinding if we saw it, so they could have just as easily shot around this, but Keanu, ever lustful for the creative process and trying new things, jumped into the skill with both feet. Shia LaBeouf cut himself and pulled a tooth out. Fury. Shia LaBeouf is known for extreme method acting, and when he signed up to be part of David Ayer's flick about American tank operators during the final weeks of World War II, things were no different. As LaBeouf recalls it, Ayer demanded the actors give him everything for Fury right off the bat, and thus the actor decided to take things into his own hands. A day after signing the contract, LaBeouf voluntarily joined the US National Guard and spent a month living on a forward operating base. It only got more intense from there. When pre-production began, he decided to cut up his own face, forcibly remove a tooth, and didn't bathe for 4 months. He knew what he was getting into with Aya, who put his cast through an intense boot camp designed to make them fight each other both verbally and physically. Being forced to live in a tank together for extended periods of time, eating, sleeping and defecating in the same spaces sounds bad enough, but LaBeouf was already steps ahead with his own self-imposed grueling experiences. Fury is a bleak look at the realities of war and the impact it has on the souls of men, and it sounds like LaBeouf brought himself as close to hell as he could manage to get into the film's mindset. Brie Larson wrote Diaries in character, Room. 2015 Best Picture winner Room is all about captivity. Brie Larson, playing the lead role of Joy Newsome, is the victim of kidnapping and abuse as she is forced to live in a single room for years with her young son who has never seen the outside world. It's dark, harrowing and heartbreaking, but beautifully shot and performed by its central players. To prime herself for the part, Larson researched and spoke to psychiatrists about trauma and malnutrition. In order to better understand the loneliness, she stayed in her house for a month by herself and got into Joy's mindset, fleshing the role out by writing in-character diary entries from previous points in Joy's life that might have led her to the moment of her capture. But it wasn't just about that character's separation from the world, it was important that Larson and her 7-year-old co-star Jacob Tremblay spent time together to form a believable bond. The actors saw each other repeatedly for 3 weeks before shooting, improvising scenes and playing with toys. Some of these they even built together, and these appear on the film's set. Daniel Day-Lewis almost died. Gangs of New York. There aren't many performers that can match how notoriously linked to the phrase method acting Daniel Day-Lewis is. Not just content with playing a part, the English actor has lived almost every role that he's performed in some fashion. Naturally, picking a standout set of method acting circumstances from his career is subjective, but on the set of Gangs of New York, Day-Lewis caught hypothermia due to his insistence on wearing period-correct outfits. Furthermore, the actor denied modern medicines and nearly died because of it. To prepare for the role of Bill the Butcher, Day-Lewis trained in the namesake profession and wandered the streets of Rome, where the piece was being filmed, getting into fights with strangers. We can only assume he came out on top every time. Few actors prepare for a role like Daniel Day-Lewis, who put his life on the line for the sake of Gangs of New York. Jamie Foxx glued his eyes shut. Ray. Whilst we're currently enjoying a revival of biopics, particularly about the lives and times of some of the world's greatest musicians, Jamie Foxx's turn as blues icon Ray Charles came before this new wave. But the actor wanted to do right by Charles and really embody the man's struggles as the musician who was famously blind for most of his life. In order to achieve this, Foxx opted to glue his eyelids shut with prosthetics before shooting every day, which often ran as long as 14 straight hours. At first, the actor suffered panic attacks set on by claustrophobia, but they passed over time. By 2004, Foxx had begun to show that he could do it all, from comedy to action, but it was commitment to character in Ray that catapulted him to stardom. Natalie Portman's commitment to Ballet, The Black Swan. Focusing on a production of Swan Lake, Portman plays Nina Sayers, who begins to descend into madness as the intense pressure and rivalry with her new co-star gets too much to take. Ballet is no joke, and in order to not only get into the correct kind of physical shape, but also be able to perform choreographed dance pieces, Portman and co-star Mila Kunis began preparing for The Black Swan more than a year in advance, with hours of dancing, CrossFit and swimming a day. Portman's body paid the price. The intense workouts caused her toenails to fall off, her feet to become calloused, and she even broke a rib performing a lift. If anything, these physical demands just drove her closer to her character. Speaking of her preparation, Portman said, "Real dancers dance with such incredible injuries that you wouldn't even believe. It's a nightmare for them to be replaced once they've made it to the top and they get these roles." The performer's commitment to the film earned her her first Oscar for Best Actress. Tom Cruise learned a whole bunch of skills. Interview with a Vampire. Paramount Pictures actually secured the rights to adapt Anne Rice's 1978 gothic horror Interview with a Vampire before the book was even published. However, the film languished in developmental hell for a long time, causing Rice's dream casting ideas to no longer be feasible when it finally bore fruit 15 years later. The studio picked Tom Cruise to play the leading role of Vampiric Lestat off the back of his successes in Top Gun and Born on the 4th of July. Rice was publicly vocal about her displeasure at the choice. Cruise had to swallow his pride and simply get on with it, launching into preparing for the role. This included reading not just the Interview with a Vampire novel, but the entire series to better understand Lestat, as well as moving to Paris, shifting 12 pounds of weight and learning to play the piano. He also watched hours of footage of lions hunting killing zebras because he saw Lestat as not necessarily evil but more of a survivalist. Anne Rice would eat humble pie when she saw the finished film. She chose to pay $7,000 for a 2-page spread in Daily Variety magazine to apologise, praise Cruise's portrayal and rescind her doubts. Christopher Lee took terrible film roles to play a wizard, The Lord of the Rings. Unlike some on this list, Sir Christopher Lee didn't put himself through physical hell in order to bring a character to life. However, as a huge fan of the Lord of the Rings series, he did everything in his power to make sure he got to take part. Lee, who admitted to reading the entire series annually, was actually the only member of the cast to actually meet Tolkien by pure chance in a pub in England. It was an experience that left Lee starstruck, despite the fact that he was already an established actor himself, known as the quintessential Dracula. When Lee caught wind of Peter Jackson's intention to cast the trilogy, the story goes that the veteran actor decided to take on a pretty abysmal TV job starring in the new adventures of Robin Hood. Why? Purely just to get something on his CV where he portrays a wizard to show that it was in his skill set. He then wrote a letter directly to Jackson and included a photo of himself in costume, pining for the role of one of Middle-earth's most ancient characters. It's very amusing to imagine Sir Christopher Lee so excited for Lord of the Rings to take these measures, as if his prestige didn't make him enough of a viable candidate alone. Leonardo DiCaprio slept in real animal carcasses. The Revenant. Leonardo DiCaprio's storied career is marked with great films and many awards, but for the longest time a Best Actor win at the Oscars infamously evaded him. That was until 2015's The Revenant, a bleak, snow-capped film about survival against the harshest realities of nature, where DiCaprio plays a man driven by self-preservation and vengeance. DiCaprio was applauded for his commitment to the role, which was highlighted by interviews given before its release, where he revealed just to what extent he had gone. Speaking to Yahoo, DiCaprio said, "I can name 30 or 40 sequences that were some of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, whether it's going in and out of frozen rivers, or sleeping in animal carcasses, or what I ate on set. I was enduring freezing cold and possible hypothermia constantly." DiCaprio knew what he had signed up for, which is why he went as far as to eat raw bison liver for the film, describing his revulsion in the finished picture as an instinctive reaction. Austin Butler avoided his family for 3 years. Elvis. At the 2022 Cannes Film Festival, Baz Luhrmann's biopic Elvis received a 12-minute ovation, the longest for any film that year. Austin Butler's turn as the king of rock and roll was given critical acclaim, and perhaps even more special, approval from the family of the legend himself. Butler worked long and hard for that kind of reaction, having begun his preparation to play Elvis Presley before shooting began, a process which took 3 years of his life. It's one thing to play a fresh and yet unforeseen fictional character, but to take on the role of one of the most recognisable musicians of all time is a tall order that Butler took to with aplomb. Not only did he get training on how to sing and dance like Presley, he also got martial arts lessons so that he could integrate karate into his movements to better portray the way the king moved. Butler read every book that he could and fell asleep listening to recordings of Elvis as he practiced the famous southern accent. Perhaps most extreme of all is that he isolated himself from his friends and family for the entire 3 years to get away from Austin Butler's life and to become Elvis Presley.
Tom Cruise learned how to hold his breath for 6 minutes. Mission Impossible: Rogue Nation. Since the first film, the build-up to each new Mission Impossible movie has become all about guessing what crazy, life-threatening stunt Tom Cruise will perform next. Scaling skyscrapers, flying helicopters, halo jumping, riding a motorcycle through oncoming traffic, he's done it all. And while all that huge stuff is undeniably impressive, one of the most underrated skills Cruise has picked up over the years is one he had to learn for the 5th installment in the franchise, Rogue Nation. Hold your breath for this one, because for a lengthy underwater sequence midway through the film, Cruise worked with a freediving record holder so he could essentially teach himself how to not breathe. The scene took 2 months to prepare for, and although Cruise blacked out a couple of times along the way, he got so proficient at his breathing exercises that he was eventually able to hold his breath for a staggering 6 minutes. I'd be lucky if I could manage 60 seconds. Sigourney Weaver learned how to communicate with gorillas in the mist. Sigourney Weaver is most famous for sci-fi blockbuster Alien. But away from all that fantastical stuff, she made a grounded and touching little movie called Gorillas in the Mist in 1988, which was a difficult project to shoot. The film centres around a mountain gorilla expert called Diane Fossey, played by Sigourney Weaver, a character who the filmmakers strove to portray as authentically as possible. This meant working with actual gorillas, and on top of that, it also meant getting Weaver in shots with them, which forced the actress to learn how to communicate with these gorillas, mainly so they would feel comfortable around her. Or, let's be honest, probably more so that they didn't kill her, because gorillas are dangerous animals after all. And so, learn to speak to gorillas, Weaver did. And in the end, Weaver's hard work paid off. She became so comfortable around the gorillas that they became comfortable in return. And her performance was so effective that it was even nominated for an Oscar for Best Actress. Joseph Gordon-Levitt learned how to walk a tightrope, The Walk. Biographical drama The Walk tells the true story of French daredevil Philippe Petit's high-wire walk between the Twin Towers in 1974. In the run-up to the movie, Gordon-Levitt worked with the man himself, Philippe Petit, who trained him how to walk along a wire. He set up a workshop so that he had plenty of one-on-one time with the actor, and unbelievably, it took just 8 days for Gordon-Levitt to learn how to walk the wire all by himself. In addition, Petit also taught Gordon-Levitt some magic tricks as well, but those skills aren't quite as impressive as being able to retain perfect balance while tiptoeing across a narrow cable. Michelle Pfeiffer learned how to use a whip. Batman Returns. Some skills are handy survival skills, some aren't in the slightest, and some are a little bit kinky, just like Michelle Pfeiffer when she played Catwoman. She fully committed herself to one particular aspect of her character's skill set, namely Selena Kyle's proficiency with a whip. According to the movie's weapons master and stunt choreographer Anthony DeLongis, Pfeiffer became extremely confident when using a whip, so much so that she actually ended up doing all her own whip work and even managed to pull off a few improvised moves that made it into the film. For proof of how good Pfeiffer got with a whip, look at the scene in the film where she throws it around Christopher Walken's neck and pulls him in. According to DeLongis, the actress did this for real, with no insert shots or cutaways required. John Krasinski learned how to maneuver through a burning building, 13 hours. John Krasinski's preparation for 13 hours were extremely arduous, with the actor spending countless hours in the gym in order to sculpt himself into a believable soldier. As well as achieving the right look, Krasinski told Yahoo Movies that he also had to learn several skills that made him feel like a soldier, including weapons training, tactical training, and weirdest of all, how to maneuver through a burning building. He said, and I quote, "We all went through rigorous gun training with Navy SEALs. We learned how to fire a whole variety of different weapons, and we even learned how to maneuver through buildings on fire." So yeah, if his house ever catches on fire, he'll be in a better position than most. Jennifer Lawrence learned how to skin squirrels, Winter's Bone. There was something natural and effortless about Jennifer Lawrence's performance as Ree Dolly in Winter's Bone, and one of the reasons for this is because she fully immersed herself into the world her character lived in. During a chat with Vanity Fair, the actress claimed that the strangest thing she's ever had to do for a role occurred while preparing for the gritty and grounded world of Winter's Bone, where she learned how to skin a squirrel for real. There's a scene in the film where Lawrence's character puts this skill to good use, confidently preparing the unfortunate animal with her bare hands. I don't think anyone wants to find out what would happen if you get on Jennifer Lawrence's bad side. Daniel Day-Lewis learned how to live like his Native American character, the Last of the Mohicans. Stories of Daniel Day-Lewis's intense method acting could probably fill several of these lists. For his role in historical epic The Last of the Mohicans, though, he didn't just acquire 1 or 2 new skills, he acquired an entire suite of them. In prep for Hawkeye, the actor took it upon himself to learn how to live like his character. Spending a month in the woods, he learned how to build canoes, track and skin animals, fight with a tomahawk, and he even practiced firing and reloading a flintlock. In fact, he immersed himself in the role to such an extent that he started carrying the gun everywhere he went, including Christmas dinner. Bet that was awkward. Ruth Wilson learned how to castrate lambs, Dark River. While preparing to play a farmer in the bleak 2017 drama Dark River, lead actress Ruth Wilson did the obvious thing. She went to work on a farm in order to gain some experience in that field. In the fields, you know, the fields and the field, you get it, you get the gist, you get the joke. Anyway, as you might expect, this wasn't a walk in the park. Or the fields. No, the joke's gone, Ellie. Move on. Anyway, spending around a month working on a farm in Yorkshire, Wilson, who at first was a complete noob at this sort of thing, was taught a bunch of different skills that made her feel more like her character. These included shearing sheep, clipping hooves, and in her own words, quote, castrating lambs. Yep, really. Look, her work ethic is admirable, but perhaps she went a bit too method with that whole castrating thing. Jim Carrey learned how to endure torture, the Grinch. Jim Carrey was decked out in layers upon layers of makeup for his role as the mean-spirited Grinch, which obviously required him to be stuck in a makeup chair, but for 8.5 hours. That's a long time. It made it borderline impossible for him to sit through on a regular basis. So producer Brian Grazer devised an unorthodox and rather bizarre solution. A specialist was brought in to put on less makeup. No, that's a big fat lie. A specialist was brought in to teach Carey how to endure torture. Yep, seriously. This gave the actor the strength to plant himself in that makeup chair for hours on end, day after day, and ultimately, his troubles paid off. While the movie was met with a middling reception overall, Carey's crazy performance is easily one of its highlights. John David Washington learned how to talk backwards. Tenet. Christopher Nolan's timey-wimey spy thriller is one of his most complex films, which is saying something coming from the guy who brought us Memento, Inception, and Interstellar. So it isn't really surprising to learn that it was also a complex one to shoot. A lot of the scenes in Tenet feature inverted people moving backwards through time, and since Nolan loves to do everything practically, if possible, his actors had to learn how to move in reverse. Leading man John David Washington told Good Morning America that he learned how to, quote, blink, walk, talk, fight, run, block, and punch backwards, which basically meant that he had to fight his own instincts and unlearn his normal way of moving. Watching characters fight and move in reverse is an extraordinary sight to behold, and one of the main reasons why it looks so good is because it was done with as little CGI as possible.
Eminem didn't want to leave his hometown of Detroit, Elysium. If there's one thing the majority of the human race can agree on, it's that there's nothing quite like your own personal home comforts. And when it comes to one of the biggest rap stars ever to grace the game, it turns out Eminem isn't willing to turn down a role in a much anticipated big screen feature if said home comforts are in danger of being sacrificed for a spell. Hot on the heels of capturing the imaginations of fans all over the world with his gritty and frequently pulsating sci-fi entry, District 9 director Neil Blomkamp was on the lookout for an actor to take up the lead role in his next venture, Elysium. The director quickly decided that the real Slim Shady was the man for the job, only for the 8 Mile star to turn down his advances after Blomkamp opted not to go with the star's suggestion to shoot the film in Eminem's hometown of Detroit. Matt Damon was recruited instead, and Slim was left to catch up on his soaps at home. Jack Nicholson didn't want to miss any Lakers games, the Mosquito Coast. When it comes to devoted fans of the world-famous LA Lakers, there perhaps don't come any more dedicated than the legendary Jack Nicholson. On top of rarely missing a home game since the early 1970s, the iconic star of Batman, The Shining, and The Departed also once turned down the chance to work on a project due to it likely costing him the chance to sit back and watch his beloved yellow and purple NBA team courtside. Said feature was 1986's The Mosquito Coast, and it would have involved the Oscar-winning sensation having to move out to Belize in order to shoot large portions of the jungle set flick. Clearly putting 2 and 2 together and coming to the conclusion that this locale was simply too far away from the Staples Center, Nicholson withdrew from the role of Ali Fox. Harrison Ford was soon brought in to lead instead, in a film that very few folks made much of a fuss about upon its eventual release. Nicholson clearly sensed the season ticket sacrifice wasn't going to be worth the trouble in the end. Mel Gibson wasn't ready to be a gladiator. Not to bring the mood down, but some things are just inevitable, aren't they? And Father Time getting to us all in the end is just one of them, I'm afraid. Academy Award winner Mel Gibson had seemingly fully accepted this fact when Ridley Scott initially approached the star of Braveheart about the concept of leading his incoming project about a betrayed Roman general by the name of Maximus Decimus Meridius. Had the part fallen into his lap a few years earlier, there's probably a world where Gibson would have been willing to put his body through the necessary hell required to believably play an ass-kicking gladiator for the feature of the same title. But despite the fact he was still only in his early 40s around the time of shooting, Gibson felt he was simply too over the hill to put his body through the many grueling battle sequences seen in Scott's 2000 epic. Russell Crowe would thankfully step in later in the day, and was more than up for the task of having Maximus's vengeance on screen. In doing so, his performance will likely echo in eternity. Liam Neeson didn't want to lose his fiancée, Goldeneye. Liam Neeson doesn't just have a particular set of skills that make him a nightmare for human traffickers. He also once had all the attributes needed to be considered for one of the most famous roles in the land. Coming off of the Academy Award success of Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, Neeson was one of the hottest thespians on the market, and one who was very high on the list of Bond producer Barbara Broccoli when it came time to throw another 007 into the Aston Martin driver's seat in the 90s. However, as revealed during a conversation on The Late Late Show with James Corden, the star's late wife, Natasha Richardson, was the main reason he couldn't agree to being handed a license to kill. As Neeson put it, "My dear departed wife did say to me, we were doing a movie together in South Carolina, and she says, darling, if you're offered James Bond and you're going to play it, you're not going to marry me." So that was that. Hugh Jackman didn't like not having a say. Casino Royale. Keeping in the vein of 007s who are never to be, here's another Hollywood action sensation who just couldn't bring themselves to make a substantial sacrifice to play the legendary James Bond. Instead of being told by his beloved partner that they wouldn't be walking down the aisle if he picked up a pistol though, Hugh Jackman's reason behind refusing to become the second cinematic Australian MI6 super spy revolved more around the way he wanted the character to be presented going forward. Around the time the Wolverine star was being considered for the part in the mid-2000s, the Bond scripts had become, as Jackman put it, unbelievable and crazy, and the actor wanted to help usher the icon into a grittier and real next chapter. But these suggestions were quickly shot down by the producers, with Jackman being told that he wasn't going to have a say in the direction the character would go should he sign on. Not content with sacrificing his own vision of what the character should be, Jackman respectfully declined, only for Daniel Craig to pump that exact same energy into his rendition of the famous badass Brit. What a world, eh? Thomas Jane doesn't do TV. Mad Men. Few television roles have become as synonymous with a supremely talented actor as Mad Men's leading ball of charisma advertising executive Don Draper is, with the equally mesmerizing Jon Hamm. However, there was once a moment in time when Hamm wasn't actually in line to step into the shoes of this fictional titan of the advertising world in the 60s. Long before Hamm would go on to be one of the most recognizable faces the small screen had to offer, the role was actually offered up to none other than the star of Deep Blue Sea and the Punisher, Thomas Jane. But luckily for Hamm, as the star himself revealed on the WTF podcast later down the road, Jane reportedly wasn't ready to sacrifice the perception of him being a movie star to appear in the series. As his agent put it, Thomas Jane doesn't do television. Hilariously, he of course ultimately did. Just 2 years on from the debut of Mad Men, Jane popped up in Hung, but said show didn't go on to be quite as successful. Robert De Niro didn't want to go through gynecology training. Dead ringers. It's all well and good confessing to be an out-and-out method actor, fiercely committed to your craft to the point where you're willing to sacrifice much of who you are for a spell, to truly immerse yourself in the world and way of being of another human. However, said tactic of getting into character can also have its downsides, when roles pop up that require a very, let's say, specific form of preparation. As the film's eventual star, Jeremy Irons, would later recount on Dead Ringers DVD commentary, Robert De Niro was almost set to take on the role of Beverly/Elliot Mantle in the unsettling story of a pair of twin gynecologists and their patients. But on top of the subject matter causing him a little bit of unease, the acting legend was said to have turned down the part because he wasn't comfortable portraying a gynecologist. De Niro is of course a well-known user of the method, so the idea of having to put in the time and substantial effort needed to convincingly portray a pair of people who specialize in fertility problems clearly wasn't a sacrifice he was interested in making for David Cronenberg's chilling thriller. Sean Connery didn't want to learn the mythology, the Lord of the Rings. In fairness to the cinematic force of nature that was the late Sir Sean Connery, nobody was really to know just how monumental an impact Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy would have on the landscape of movie making. But that still doesn't change the fact that the iconic 007 star missed out on lining up alongside a multitude of hobbits and elves, largely because he wasn't in the mood to really scratch the surface. After being offered a whopping 15% of the global box office receipts for this series to star as Gandalf, according to CNN, not to mention $4 million in the bank guaranteed, Connery gave the project a hard no. His reasoning behind not being on board was mostly due to simply not understanding the tale of a fellowship doing everything in their power to conquer evil in Middle-earth, despite reading the books. In short, Connery just wasn't happy to invest the time needed to really embrace the world that J.R.R. Tolkien had crafted in his legendary novels. It's a shame too, because if he had, he'd have come away with a staggering $400 million based on the film's eventual earnings. Lawrence Fishburne didn't want any part in making heroin use attractive. Pulp Fiction. It's pretty difficult to imagine a world where Samuel L. Jackson doesn't turn every head on the planet with just one captivating delivery of Ezekiel 25:17. Yet were it not for Lawrence Fishburne not being willing to sacrifice his beliefs for the sake of bringing Quentin Tarantino's jaw-dropping Pulp Fiction script to life, you better believe that world could have been a reality. But Fishburne most definitely wasn't a fan of the director's cavalier and loose handling of heroin use over the course of the flick. Telling Vulture later down the road, "It wasn't about my character in Pulp Fiction, it was about the way in which the heroin thing was delivered. And the whole effing thing with the hypodermic and the adrenaline shot? Nah." With said moment going on to be arguably one of the most memorable sequences in the movie, it's evident this was a deal-breaker for Tarantino and Fishburne during their negotiations over the role. This also disproves rumors that Fishburne's agent had convinced him to originally turn down Jules Winfield due to it not being seen as a leading man part. But either way, Fishburne just wasn't on board with Pulp Fiction's depiction of heroin and its users. Will Smith needed to be the lead. Django Unchained. On the subject of roles being seen as a leading part, here's that time Will Smith was adamant that the role of Django Freeman in a film literally titled Django Unchained was most definitely not the focus of Quentin Tarantino's feature. Despite Jamie Foxx going on to produce one of the most compelling and nuanced performances of his career in the part of the heroic lead, alongside the likes of Christoph Waltz, Leonardo DiCaprio and Samuel L. Jackson, Smith just wasn't convinced the role was big enough upon reading the script, and he wasn't going to play second fiddle to Waltz's Dr. King Schultz. Smith told Entertainment Weekly later, "Django wasn't the lead, so it was like, I need to be the lead. The other character was the lead. I was like, no, Quentin, please, I need to kill the bad guy." The Hollywood megastar would also go on to explain that he envisioned this tale as a love story and not a vengeance story, with this direction for the overall way the story was told being something that Smith wasn't happy sacrificing in favor of an excessively violent end product. Constance Wu earned $600 as an undercover stripper, Hustlers. One of the most unexpected of hits to tumble out of 2019 came in the form of the Jennifer Lopez starring Hustlers, a film which follows a group of New York strippers who drug and steal money from various CEOs and stock traders over the course of the tale. Among the many notable performances on show in the comedy drama was Constance Wu's portrayal of Destiny/Dorothy, a young stripper taken under the wing of Lopez's Ramona Vega. But getting stuck into the part wasn't just a case of Wu putting herself through a few hours of pole practice and rocking up to set. The actor went fully undercover in order to really get a sense of the world she was about to step into. Far from just acting as a fly on the wall though, Wu revealed on the Kelly Clarkson show that she actually brought home $600 working as an undercover stripper, performing lap dances to strangers in order to accumulate the cash, changing her hair and adding fake tattoos on her neck for her mission. Wu would also admit that the whole experience was not funny despite Clarkson's comical response to the revelation. Margot Robbie goes conservative on Twitter. Bombshell. Not every type of undercover acting mission involves a star donning a wig and putting on a fake accent. Some forms of secret research can be found in as subtle a place as social media. Not a sentence you're gonna hear every day, admittedly. When embodying the role of fictional associate producer Kayla Popsill, one of the women who exposed Fox News CEO Roger Ailes for his instances of sexual harassment in Bombshell, Margot Robbie decided that she needed to really understand how millennial conservative women ticked. So the Australian actor opted to hop onto Twitter under a covert handle and do some snooping and interacting with various other conservative women. Along with this undercover tweeting spell, Robbie also immersed herself in Fox News, studying shows that she felt Kayla would have been a fan of when trying to add authentic layers to her eventually lauded performance. Bet she had a whale of a time. Robert Pattinson immersed himself in a thug's life. Good time. Though he has gone on record to admit that he's not willing to put himself through hell in the gym to just bring a superhero to life, that doesn't necessarily mean Robert Pattinson isn't entirely up for the job of wholeheartedly delving into the difficult real-life scenarios his characters would find themselves in. Look no further than his frightening dedication during the lead-up to his part in the Safdie brothers' Good Time. In preparation for the role of New York thug Konstantin Koninikas, the Twilight star bleached his hair to the point that your hair is no longer your hair, it's just strands of chemicals. On top of this, Pattinson also befriended ex-convicts and conversed with correction officers in prison, all whilst in character. Taking things up a notch, the actor also kick-started a few improvised skirmishes in a Dunkin' Donut and car wash for good good measure. Speaking about his joy at not being exposed in situ, Pattinson explained, "There wasn't a single cell phone picture of me the whole time. I was so concerned about that happening, because I love the idea of the film world being blurred with reality, and having people on the street react to you. I think we can all agree he more than achieved that." Rachel McAdams has her cover blown in an orthodox community. Disobedience. And now for the first instance of an actor very much being rumbled in the midst of what appeared to be some very cunning undercover work. Instead of managing to smoothly slip into an orthodox community whilst researching for her role in 2017's Disobedience as Esty, a woman who reignites an affair with Rachel Weisz's Ronit in the flick, The Notebook and Mean Girls star soon found out that just not making eye contact and attempting to go under the radar simply isn't good enough to go unnoticed sometimes. Explaining how her quest to get a better understanding of the community through the lens of an average civilian was thwarted by her stardom, McAdams recalled, "They recognized me right away, and by the following day, everyone knew about everywhere I went. But they were very kind, and I was even invited to a beautiful Shabbat dinner." The star's research also took her to London, where the film is set, with McAdams also noting that "I also hosted a book club, focusing on the novel the film is based on, and I cooked traditional Jewish meals." Though she likely balanced this research with answering questions about Gretchen Wieners and Doctor Strange naturally. Tom Holland decided to swing by a school, Spider-Man Homecoming. Speaking of MCU alumni, it's time to swing into the hilarious research Tom Holland felt was entirely necessary when slinging a web for his first solo Spidey outing in the sprawling Marvel universe. With the Brit not being that clued up on the ins and outs of American high school life, Holland was sent on a sort of research experiment before taking Peter Parker for his second spin on the big screen. When asked by director John Watts what he discovered after his stint in a New York City high school, the actor brilliantly noted, "Firstly, I'm thick as shit, and I had no idea what they were talking about," before adding, "Secondly, it is so unbelievably diverse, especially in Queens and Brooklyn and the Bronx." Perhaps the funniest part of this whole Bronx School of Science experiment is the fact that Holland would later reveal himself to be the cinematic Spider-Man, only for the students in said school to laugh off his claims, due to it not being public knowledge at the time, and carry on as usual. Charming. Scarlett Johansson picked up Strangers in Scotland, Under the Skin. In what many would class as the actor's most adventurous and downright chilling work to date, Under the Skin saw Scarlett Johansson bring to life an alien under the disguise of an attractive woman who enjoyed nothing more than preying on Scottish blokes. Committing to the part in a rather unsettling way over the course of the shoot, director Jonathan Glazer had the Avenger legitimately go undercover for large portions of filming, with Johansson driving around Scotland in a van, all while sporting a brown wig and British accent, as she picked up strangers and lured them into her company. Thankfully, said dudes weren't then genuinely submerged in ominous liquid like in the flick. Instead, they were soon informed as to what was actually going on by the creative team, and some of the no doubt embarrassed lads even stuck around for the rest of the ride, shooting further scenes for the film whilst clued up on the fact that they were actually a part of a sinister sci-fi movie. Kevin Bacon sneaked into high school. Footloose. Yes, that title sounds weird. Heading back to school again now, here's that time a 23-year-old Kevin Bacon wasn't convinced he remembered what it meant to be an authentic 17-year-old youngster during his preparation for Footloose. So sure enough, a high school field trip was set into motion. Whereas Tom Holland decided to drop his guard slightly and largely laughed off the high school research experience as a whole, Bacon would admit that his venturing back in time actually proved to be massively beneficial to him, telling John Lithgow in a Variety Actors on Actors session, "It was exactly like the movie, because some kids gave me a hard time, made fun of me, made fun of my hair, made fun of my clothing. I was dressed and looked like the character. Some of the girls giggled and formed little groups and would whisper about me." Though Bacon was only on campus for a day, it's clear the genuine cruelty of kids really struck a nerve with him and his approach to the character, with the star going on to produce a career-making display in the hip-shaking hit. Renee Zellweger got an office job, Bridget Jones's Diary, going on to become one of the most likable and relatable characters ever to be captured on camera over a span of 3 heartwarming Bridget Jones entries. Renee Zellweger's performance as the titular hopeless romantic captured the hearts of millions in next to no time. But there was much more when it came to Zellweger's turn than simply brushing off her British accent and downing a few bottles of vinos in the build-up, though that probably did help. The actor actually decided to legitimately take up a position at a British publishing house, much like her character held in this fictional feature world. Going all in on the deception, Zellweger would work under the name of Bridget Cavendish, whilst plying her trade in the publishers, with the rest of her colleagues informed that she was merely fulfilling her work experience with the team. In the 3 weeks under the company banner, the eventual Oscar winner would send out many a book to reviewers, file newspaper reviews, and master the office coffee order, something I myself have never been able to do. The best part, Zellweger once had to file a particular news story that saw a reporter complaining about the Americans casting as Jones. She swiftly responded by scribbling rubbish next to the filing. What a legend! Ralph Fiennes pretended to be a lost driver quiz show. Sometimes an actor is required to think outside the box should an obstacle prevent them from conducting the sort of research they feel is intrinsic to understanding the character they are playing in a feature. With Ralph Fiennes set to play none other than real-life American writer and editor Charles Van Doren, who was involved in a quiz show scandal in the 50s in 1994's Quiz Show, the actor understandably wanted to sit down with the figure to really digest the way he spoke and conducted himself as a person. Those involved with the feature, however, simply felt that Van Doren wouldn't want no part of the project that would be documenting his rise and fall as a contestant on 21. So a plan was hatched involving Fiennes and a member of film staff driving out to his Connecticut hometown. When there, the two just so happened to stumble upon Van Doren sat on a chair outside his house, with Fiennes then thinking on his feet and pretending to be a lost driver as a way to get Charles to converse with him. Directions were soon delivered, and Fiennes was given the precious first-hand research he so desired, albeit via some cheeky deception.